Have you ever heard of proteins that can actually like change their shape like whenever they need to?
Yeah, like on demand.
Yeah. They're called metamorphic proteins.
Yeah.
And they're basically like transformers, but like in the microscopic world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we're diving into some really, really new research. It's from March 2025, from a paper in PNAS.
Okay.
And this paper basically says that these shape-shifting proteins might be controlled by something kind of surprising: temperature.
Oh, that's interesting. It's a very fascinating idea. These metamorphic proteins, they're like everywhere. You find them in humans, you find them in bacteria.
Okay.
They do all sorts of really important things. But the question of how they actually morph from one shape to another,
Yeah.
that's been a little bit of a mystery.
So imagine you're a scientist, and you've got like 26 of these shape-shifting proteins,
Okay.
and they're right there in front of you. The researchers in this study decided to look closely at what are called the hydrophobic contacts inside these proteins. And so think of it like this. Certain parts of the protein are like oil, like they do not want to touch water.
Right.
So these oily bits, they all kind of clump together so that they can stay dry.
Okay.
And then that clumping affects the overall shape of the protein.
I see.
So what's really interesting is the researchers found that the number of these oily clumps, it actually changes depending on the temperature.
Oh, wow. So the colder it is, the fewer clumps there are.
Exactly.
And that makes the protein more flexible, so it's more likely to change shape. It's kind of like the cold makes the protein like a little bit looser,
Yeah.
like a little bit more willing to like try on a new outfit or something.
So it's not just about what these proteins are made of, it's also about how they're affected by like their environment.
All right.
And in this case, it's the temperature,
Exactly.
which makes me wonder, like, could we use this to design proteins that change shape whenever we want them to, like turning a switch on and off?
That's the like $1 million question. Like if we can understand how temperature affects these hydrophobic contacts, then we might be able to engineer proteins to shapeshift in a very specific way
But that's cool.
when we want them to.
That could lead to like tons of new possibilities.
For sure.
But let's not get like too ahead of ourselves. What were the specific experiments that the researchers actually did to test out their theory?
So they took these 26 pairs of proteins and then they like carefully measured the differences in the hydrophobic contacts between the two shapes of each protein.
Yeah.
And the key was they compared these differences at a bunch of different temperatures
Oh.
to see if they could find a pattern.
And did they?
Or-
Like, was there a clear connection between the temperature and the protein's shape-shifting?
So they found that almost every single protein pair showed a really big difference in those oily clumps, the hydrophobic contacts based on the temperature.
Hmm.
It wasn't random, like it wasn't just happening by chance.
So there's a consistent trend.
Yeah.
Colder temperatures lead to fewer hydrophobic contacts.
Yeah.
Right. Which leads to a more flexible protein.
Exactly.
And that's more likely to change shape.
Yeah,
That's like pretty convincing evidence to support their theory.
it is.
But I'm curious, like, were there any limitations to their approach?
Well, their sample size was limited. Like it was only 26 pairs.
Okay.
So to really be sure about this theory, we need to see these results again with way more proteins. It's kind of like saying we figured out how birds fly just by looking at robins and pigeons.
Right.
You know, we need to look at a lot more types of birds
To be sure.
to be sure.
Or in this case, we need to look at more proteins.
Exactly.
Okay. So this is really just the first step,
It is.
but it's a peek into what could be a huge discovery.
Yeah.
It sounds like we might be close to having a whole new level of control over how proteins behave.
For sure.
But before we like jump into all the amazing things that this research could lead to, let's take a pause here.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about what this could mean.
Yeah, like if this research is right and we can control how proteins shapeshift just using temperature, what could we actually do with that?
Okay, so think about this. What if we could design a protein that's like a tiny little capsule and it's activated by temperature?
Okay, so like a microscopic delivery truck.
Exactly. And let's say it's carrying some powerful cancer drug, but we only want it to release the drug when it reaches a tumor.
I see.
And tumors often have a slightly different temperature than the tissue around them.
Oh, okay.
So our little protein truck arrives, it senses that the temperature has changed a little bit, and boom, it changes shape and releases the drug right where it's needed.
Wow, that's amazing. So much more targeted than chemo is now.
Right, because chemo can affect healthy cells too.
Exactly. But how would we control the temperature so precisely, like inside the body?
That's a really good question, and it's one of the big challenges, but there are some promising techniques that are being developed right now, like focused ultrasound or nanoparticles that generate heat when they get a signal from outside the body.
So it's not science fiction, but it'll take some serious work to make it happen.
For sure.
Are there any other things we should be thinking about, potential problems?
Oh, of course, safety is a huge concern. Like, what if our protein truck accidentally releases its cargo in the wrong place? Or what if it changes into a shape that makes the immune system attack? We need to be really careful about designing these proteins to be super specific and predictable.
That makes sense. I mean, we're talking about reprogramming the building blocks of life.
Exactly.
That's powerful stuff. But thinking back to those 26 protein pairs, they all show they were sensitive to temperature. Does that mean that all proteins can shapeshift?
That's a fascinating question. The research only looked at proteins that we already knew could change shape, so we don't know for sure if every single protein out there is sensitive to temperature. But this study definitely suggests that there might be a whole bunch of shapeshifters out there that we haven't even discovered yet.
Wow, so there could be this whole secret world of proteins that work differently than we thought.
It's possible.
That's pretty cool to think about. But what about using these shapeshifting proteins to detect diseases, not just treat them?
Now, you're thinking like a scientist. Imagine a protein that changes shape. If it finds a specific biomarker, let's say a molecule that tells us someone has early stage Alzheimer's,
Okay, I'm following you.
we could make a simple blood test where this protein acts like a signal flare. It changes color or glows only if it finds that Alzheimer's biomarker.
That sounds pretty amazing, but would it be accurate? Could the protein be triggered by something else and give us a false positive?
That's why testing and validation are so important. We have to make sure that these proteins only react to their specific targets
Yeah.
and not other things in the body. It's like training a bloodhound to sniff out one specific scent and ignore all the others.
So it's not just about designing the protein. It's about understanding the whole complex environment it's going to be working in. This is really complex stuff.
It is.
It seems like the potential benefits are huge, but so are the challenges.
Absolutely. It's going to take a lot more research, and we have to think carefully about the ethical implications before we can really use these shape-shifting proteins to their full potential.
When you say ethical implications, what do you mean?
Well, imagine if we could engineer proteins that could change human behavior or make people physically stronger. There are some really big ethical questions we need to answer before we go down that road.
You're right. This technology could be incredibly powerful, and with great power comes great responsibility. It's a good reminder that we always need to be thinking about ethics when we're making scientific progress. But let's not get too lost in hypotheticals. What are the researchers planning to do next with this temperature study?
Well, they've really only just started. Remember, they only looked at 26 protein pairs. They need to look at way more proteins, hundreds or even thousands of proteins, and test them at different temperatures to be really sure about their findings.
So they need more data to refine their theory and work out all the kinks.
Yes.
It's amazing to think that something as simple as temperature could be the key to unlocking all this potential in these tiny little proteins.
It is, and it really shows us how much we still don't know about the world around us. Even at the microscopic level, there's still so much to explore.
I love that sense of wonder and possibility. That's what makes science so exciting.
Mm.
But before we wrap up, I want to bring it back to you, the listener. What's the one thing you should take away from this research? I feel like we found this whole other side to proteins. It's like they can speak another language.
Yeah, and that language is temperature. I love that analogy. It really does feel like we're just starting to understand these molecules. Like, for so long, we've been focused on their structure, their sequence, but now it's like, oh, their environment matters too. That changes how they behave, how they transform, and do all these different things.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like, what other things in the environment could be affecting them that we haven't thought about yet, like light or pressure, maybe even sound waves.
Yeah, right. It's an amazing thought. This whole temperature shape-shifting thing could just be the beginning, like the first clue to a whole new understanding of proteins.
It's like we've been looking at a flat picture of
Yeah.
a protein, and now we're seeing it in 3D, like it's alive and moving and changing.
Exactly.
And it just makes me think about all the things we could do with this that we haven't even thought of yet. Like, if we can control shape-shifting with temperature,
Hmm.
what else could we do?
The possibilities are pretty crazy. Imagine materials that could heal themselves when the temperature changes, or sensors that could detect pollution really precisely. We might even be able to use this in agriculture, like to make crops that can adapt to different climates by changing their proteins when the temperature changes.
So we could be entering a whole new world of bioengineering, where we're not just messing with genes, but actually controlling how proteins move and interact within living things.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
But like we talked about, we have to be careful. We have to think about the ethics of all this.
Absolutely anything this powerful could be misused, so we need to talk openly and honestly about where the limits are for this technology to make sure it's used responsibly for good and not for harm.
It's a huge responsibility, but it's also a huge opportunity to solve some of the world's biggest problems. And hey, maybe someone listening right now will be the one to make the next big discovery in this field.
I bet there are people out there who are going to hear about this research and have their minds blown and go on to do amazing things. So to everyone listening, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep pushing the boundaries of science.
That's a great way to end this. We hope this deep dive has given you a glimpse into this amazing world of shape-shifting proteins and how they might change our future. And remember, the world is full of mysteries just waiting to be solved. And sometimes all it takes is a new way of looking at things, or in this case, a change in temperature, to uncover something truly amazing.
Until next time, stay curious and keep those proteins shape-shifting.